All right, this is your chance to stump the experts. No, this is your chance to get any questions, anything and everything that you wanted to know about asset management but were afraid to ask. This is the panel to ask from. No, I did actually. She was formally engaged. Let's just say that. Who's going to kick it off with a question? Because remember my warning: if you don't have questions, I have questions. Henry, you must have a question. No questions from you. Henry, not yet. You'll come up with a question. Here we go.
Yeah. I like the example that was given in the morning regarding the pyramids and the Taj Mahal and the sewer. So what is that which is different from the past where, you know, we had such a beautiful structures created which are less vulnerable to, you know, maintenance and a long life compared to the structures we are building today and the assets? Is it the financial budgets or is it the skilled labor or both?
Who's taking that one? You got an opinion about it, I'm sure.
Terry, just because I've got an opinion about it doesn't make it right. I've got an opinion about everything. I don't have an authoritative answer to that, obviously. I think my own view is that we value real skill much less. And the reason I put the quote up about people who know the price of everything and the value of nothing was to make that point. I think I regret that a lot of technicians and engineers are being given less training and experience before they're being considered experts than before. I would say the same about medics. A neighbour of mine went through medical training and is now a consultant in the UK, and the people following him were subject to a limitation of hours, so they were never on call for 7 nights in a row and all this sort of stuff, and they didn't see one patient go all the way through the experience. So I think it's a choice about how much you spend on your structures, and there's some very expensive buildings around. Whether they're beautiful is not for me to say. In terms of the skill, which you did raise as an explicit point, I would say it's a pity we don't still value some skills more.
So I work for a public sector organization, and I'll take a little bit different approach for that. It really, so I was looking at, our Port Authority of New York and New Jersey is going through pretty significant restructuring. And I was going back to the original mandates that port was given. And their mandate from the New York Chamber of Commerce was fairly substantial in terms of what it was trying to achieve. And what inspired me about the slides is that you're talking about, love, God, these other sort of things that were being aspired to as sort of general aspirations for human society at the time. And I think part of it is the lack of vision and lack of aspiration for the human community. That some of the, and again, I'll get back to the sort of Port Authority. So the Port Authority, or the New York Chamber of Commerce at the time, they were in there advocating the development of the transatlantic cable, or the putting in place the Erie Canal, or building out a bi-state Port Authority that can move commerce and freight and air and later air. And they gave a mandate to a public organization to choose that. We're setting our sights as public organizations fairly low, I believe, and that's one of the reasons why we don't see the same type of quality in our organization. And the other example that you gave on a basic infrastructure level of the sewer system and the water systems, those type of things as well.
We're not disagreeing at all, and for what it's worth, my answer is that the investment in sewers was hugely worthwhile, and that is the approach we should take. If you value society, we should underpin it with infrastructure that lasts. You should be building for your grandchildren, not for... In fact, let me give you a quick anecdote. In the UK at the moment, High Speed 2 is a proposed railway. Some of the opposition groups are very vocal, and one of them thought they got a clinching argument. They stood up in front of reporters and so on and said, "But I'll be dead before this is running." Sorry, that's not a good argument. The railways that are there now were built, and often people weren't there afterwards, but it's the right investment. So it's about long term, which is my test.
There is an interesting exception to the observation that it isn't happening at the moment very much. And guess what? It's in China again. I don't know how many of you know about the Great North River Project? Yeah? China. They're diverting a river from south of China to north of China. They're physically relocating 1.5 million people. It's a 200-year construction project or something. Right? I think the first wave is a mere 30 or 50 years. Okay? This is global re-engineering of a nation. And that takes a bit of vision. All right? So it's not that it doesn't exist, it tends to be only when you get circumstances that allow it to come forth. The vision, the degree of influence that can see it through, and obviously the government structures there allow that to be possible, and societal acceptance of the necessity. Actually, funnily enough, by pure coincidence, I was watching a TED talk 48 hours ago on exactly this topic, which looked at, could we ever do another Apollo program? And the answer is probably not in the West at the moment. Not because the cash isn't there, despite the problems, not because the political will couldn't be there if it was deemed expedient, mostly because societal perception that there are other priorities. You need all three to come together. The vision, the physical capability, and general acceptance that diverting resources in that direction is worth that premium, the big shine factor.
And relate that back to asset management. So asset management, does asset management have a role in bringing that philosophical basis of the human good, of the planet Earth? I mean, you know, to get, without getting too go ahead, Rhys, you take that one then.
I think it does, and I think one of the things that we very successfully captured in the 55,000 document is the need to go out to stakeholders and find out what their requirements are. I think if we go back to Bazalgette's sewers on the London, there were some very pressing imperatives, like people were dying, but he had a vision and a stakeholder group that was able to finance that, to take that hugely forward. Another example, and this is kind of trying to link it back to maintenance as well, is that we should maintain things to achieve a wider set of objectives. So I remember having a debate with quite a senior manager some time ago at in the early days of PAS 55, and he kind of said to me, so what you're saying is that if I own a high street store and my engineer is telling me that the paint on the outside of the high street store should last for 5 years, that there might be an argument for painting the store more often than 5 years. So for example, if my business objective is to have the best looking storefront on the street, then I may choose to maintain that and repaint it every 2 years, even though that the paint has a specification of 5. And it's getting that stakeholder requirements piece balanced with the technical ability we have to deliver a solution. And sometimes our stakeholders will require us to do things more often than the technical solution would suggest. And we tend to be driven to say, it says 5 years repaint, so I will only do it every 5 years. But if your business objective is to look damn good, then repaint every 2. That's a stakeholder requirement. If you budget for it and your stakeholders are happy to pay for it, then that's the asset management solution.
What about giving people something pragmatic to take away from this today? David said it earlier that people were approaching him, and maybe each one of you or anybody who's willing to come forward with it. So should the audience here take these concepts that they're learning today proactively back to their top leadership, or should they just prepare themselves for when their top leadership brings this concept to them? What should the people in this room do? What conversation should they be having when they go back to their organization about this particular topic?
I don't think they want to go off half-cocked. I think they want to listen to the material that's here, but they have to internalize it, which means they need to do some more work. What they got here was a nice taste of it, but I think you need to go back to some of the IAM's documents, whether it's the anatomy document or some of the other material that they have available. But you really need to educate yourself. You need to say, okay, now let's take this material and apply it to my business. Not that, you know, somebody did this and somebody got that. It's, okay, in our business, this is what it means. And so I think until you have that message ready, you're probably not needing to take it back to your executives yet.
Go ahead.
I've got one practical suggestion you can start with. Whether or not you've got an executive with their ears open at all, you can start collecting the evidence. And the evidence I suggest is what I call the lost opportunity costs. The stuff that's slipping through the cracks because of silo behaviors, of miscommunications, of short-termism. All right? KPIs creating distorting behaviors. Start developing a little black book of case studies of missed opportunity. That will become incredibly useful to you later on. Okay? What money we're leaving on the table. All right? It's not necessarily inefficiency. It's usually doing the wrong thing rather than doing the thing the wrong way. And there's quite a lot of it going on in every single business.
So like a journal, keep a journal of lost opportunity?
Yeah, but make sure you dollarize it. Make sure you put a price on the lost opportunity it represents, what it could have been if we'd done it a different way or a different thing.
Scott?
Yeah, there's two ways of looking at it, and we've lived one of the ways. We were pushing very strong to get a policy statement implemented for our asset management program, but we had so much turnover in our executive leadership that no one was willing to bite. So we changed our approach to something similar that John just said, is we're shooting to build it from the middle, that we'll go through and develop the program using a network within the organization. And then once we have proven success, bring it up to the executive leadership with the policy, because we'll already have the wins documented. And that's a much better way to be, or much better prepared to be. On the other side of it, if you have management that's willing to do it, you have to be ready to implement it. Because if they create a policy or sign off on a policy, the expectation is that you're going to be following through. So if you're ready for it, that's great. But if you think it's a great idea to get it and you're not ready for it, then there'll probably be consequences.
David, did you want to add something?
I agree with what the last two speakers have said, but I'd like to just offer a word of caution and then maybe a slightly different way of taking the lessons back. I think one of the biggest risks to asset management succeeding is that it is seen as the fad of the month. It's a new management acronym, to use what Tim was saying about the latest thing. And I think there is a lot of cynicism attached to someone who comes back from a course or from an event or from something like this, eyes shining and a new idea, and this is what we're going to do, and it'll all save everything. I would counsel you not to do that, because it will be rejected most likely by people who haven't been here. So fad of the month and the temporary nature of any change, I would just counsel you to think about. So that's the downside, if you like. I agree with the point of internalizing and thinking about some of this. I agree with maybe keeping some records, but you could try some very gentle suggestions when an opportunity comes up and say, could we compare this or could we compare that, and this is why I think it's a good way of doing it. Now don't argue that the manager's wrong, the board is wrong, everyone else is wrong, because it won't get anywhere. But the recording of what happened when you did put a sensible suggestion forward is probably at least as powerful again than just recording what might have been. But I do think you need to think about this quite a lot before you try and get everybody around you to do something very, very different. Sorry if that sounds a little bit downbeat.
No, that sounds great. Hope Dave's got you beat here, and then I'll bring it right back.
So my question, I had a chance to ask David about this a little bit earlier. Implementing all this is a huge change management effort. And I would like to get some of your opinions on just how you affect that well. It's a skill set that often isn't part of the tool set that we have here. So your thoughts on the change management aspect of this, please.
So we started this journey for ourselves about 2.5 years ago, and we set up a task force to sort of just get a sense of whether or not asset management in general resonated within our organization. And the task force concluded probably within the third session that we were bound to fail. It was no way that you could make the type of changes that we were talking about in our culture. Our culture was is inherently risk adverse. It's been doing, it's sort of very tribal based. It's very much on, built around silos. You know, every sort of, you know, bad habit you could sort of identify, we have at least one element of it. And so I think one of the big critical success factors that that got us this far was that recognition. Because as soon as we accepted that fact, we made this really about the change. And so everything we do is about, you know, encouraging the transformation, leading change, putting people first. And in fact, under my organization, we hired our first director of change management as part of our asset management program. It was that important. And when you start looking at the body of knowledge in change management, there's definitely tools, techniques, practices, and good project management as well. They all have those things. And so then it became for us about managing the change, or managing change in a controlled environment as a principal aspect of what we consider our, you know, that's going to enable us to be successful. And it's not easy, and there's all sorts of problems with it, but that was really important to us.
And one thing to consider is that if you look at the standard itself, you can scope the standard to meet your needs. So we have the standard, and you shouldn't think that you have to do everything all at once for every asset. You can scope it in a controlled way where you can work through some of the issues. Maybe it's a critical piece of equipment or a critical operation, and you scope your asset management system for that. Not everything, but a very focused implementation.
How about, you know, Dave's from a very large organization. Michael's running the largest, millions of people a day going through his transit system. You're a part of a global pharmaceutical company that's saving the lives of people. But what about these people that Tim's talking about, these small little, the village is only 1,000 people and they have a municipal water system, or they have is this scale to, what's happening here with ISO 55000 and with asset management practices that IAM are promoting, can that be applied to some of the organizations that might be in here that are smaller organizations, or do they have to have, you know, large scale infrastructure themselves to create asset management?
Well, I'll turn that right around to you, because you are our test case. If you could implement it, then we felt we would be successful. So as a small business owner with small infrastructure, what do you think?
Well, we're looking at it. I see Kelly was in here earlier. She's in charge of that, and Ramesh is nudging us every step of the way. We get an email from our consultant every week pushing us towards that documentation. But we haven't done it wholeheartedly. First off, the standard isn't published yet. It will be published in January. But we'll take. Yeah, thank you very much, David. We'll take a look at it then and make our due considerations. But it's absolutely right. We're very interested, and because it's focused on value, and what business should turn away from a managing system that's designed to deliver value, that's designed to focus everybody on value, however that's defined by top management. We think, as reliability, web, and uptime, we think we have a very unique definition of what we call value, and some people like it. And so we do want to formalize that. Absolutely. Go ahead, Rhys.
I was just going to add, I mean, there's lots of words in 55,000 about making sure that the processes and the approaches and the tools and techniques that you adopt are appropriate to your organization. I think one thing to flag at this point is don't be fooled by the fact that small organizations can get away with simple procedures and that large organizations need complex procedures. Because if you are a very small organization but you manage a very high-risk activity, then a simple procedure is almost certainly the wrong answer. A high-risk activity will still require a complex solution, even if there's only 5 of you. So you need to scale them to meet the needs of your organization, the abilities of your organization, the complexity and the risks associated with what your organization does. 55,000 allows you to do that, and it very clearly says choose it so that it's appropriate.
Last year I was at a conference on transit asset management, and I did a presentation, and we're the largest transit agency in North America. We're 50% of all transit activities or trips are provided by us. But a small company in Long Branch, California, was also doing their presentation. And it was very quickly, recognizable that we were talking about the same thing. So, and that the scalability was there, and that I could learn a lot from them, and they could learn a lot from me. In particular, because of the nimbleness, they needed to bring 3 people in a room to make the decision. And then they went forward and put in place risk management systems or risk matrix and and started to introduce long life cycle analysis. Whereas for me, it's going to take 5, 7 years to do that. They were able to do it in 5 or 7 months. But the principles were scalable, and we had a very long conversation afterwards, as an example.
I'll just give you one example that takes it pretty much to the extreme, I think, because I've done this as a conceptual test to make sure it was scalable. See it applied to a 5-man dairy farm. Each cow is an asset.
Were the cows the stakeholders too?
Cows, they all got a stake in this. Very good. Medium rare, but very good. Well done. They got so far in this, they were risk-based, real-time condition monitoring, dynamic optimization on feedstock to milk yield and milk chemical composition, not just maximizing the sweat the asset, because the cow doesn't last very long if you over-stress it, right the way through to music in the milking parlors. So the shine factor came out too. It applies right the way down to that level of joined-up thinking. Guys, asset management's just joined-up thinking and common sense, isn't it? But it's actually making it normal, all right?
Yeah, I got a question for maybe Rhys or someone else can answer this. Standard is here. It'll be out next month. What's happening in the worldwide, internationally, to implementation-wise? Anything you hear from other Europe, Southeast Asia, wherever, what's happening there? Second question is kind of the same thing, is that PAS 55 got some recognition when it was applied by regulators. When it comes to standard, you have private, you got a public. And regulators, when they become interested, PAS 50 got some success. What's happening, anything that regulators are going to apply 55,000? You guys can talk a little bit about what's happening in that front?
Okay, so two questions there, Ramesh. Just let me clarify the first one. So on your first question, you were asking about what's happening around the world. Is that in terms of preparing for it being there or in terms of its uptake? Implementation, okay. So certainly from my perspective, and I guess the other guys who operate internationally and around the US as well will have a view, but I certainly see an awful lot of enthusiasm. I think for me, the big message I keep hearing is that a lot of the players who already use PAS 55 are already looking at ISO 55000. In some parts of the world and in some industries, there is going to be a race to be the first to get it used and adopted. Whether that's a good thing or not, I will remain mute. But there is certainly that kind of enthusiasm. I'm also seeing other industries that haven't been big users of PAS 55 starting to pick this up and become excited by it, probably because it hasn't got that word physical in the title anymore. Also the fact that it's not, now it's an ISO instead of a British Standards Institution document means that there are actually quite a lot of countries that are now looking at this with interest who would have never picked up PAS 55. Here is a prime example, but even in Europe, France was never an adopter of PAS 55. And yet they're hugely enthusiastic about ISO 55000. So yeah, we're seeing that. Asia is always a part of the world that likes its management system frameworks. They're definitely excited about it and are picking it up as well. I don't know whether you guys want to add on that, John, or...
What is happening is there's a lot of people thinking about transition, including the Institute of Asset Management. We will issue some guidance to help people make that transition. And it doesn't have to be rushed, and we don't want to stampede people into doing things they're not ready to do. But we can talk about that in more detail if we want. In terms of what I see happening, I'd just like to raise your sights again to the big picture. I think there's going to be a very different outcome with this standard than we had previously. So, for example, I'm aware of already huge savings in insurance premiums by companies that are doing asset management because the insurer understands and can see a reduced risk. Now, of all the things likely to appeal to a finance director or CEO, savings on maintenance may or may not be a good thing, and you heard some really good advice from Terry in his presentation. But in terms of net savings of a sheer premium payment, that's got to be good news, hasn't it? So if you look also at people like Macquarie Bank, which is a huge investor, making acquisitions and doing due diligence everywhere, they are using asset management as well as the balance sheet. So their value of a company is actually a true value, not what somebody would like to represent as a true value. Now, if you extend that to how do you value the share price of a lot of companies, as soon as you get analysts using asset management for that, which I don't think is very far off, you've only got to get one or two in that game, and there'll be the Me Too and the blue chips will want to be in there, and suddenly you'll find some annual reports have got our care of assets and asset management, and a lot of it will be rubbish and wrong. Just like a lot of people do implementation because it's compliance-based. So what? There'll be people getting real value, and suddenly others will want that.
Got another question?
Sorry, I think Tim wants to...
Oops, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'll just, a couple comments on the infrastructure world that I see with the standard is a lot of federal agencies and state agencies are very keen on asset management. And in New York State, if you want to go get some financing for some infrastructure, one of the things they're asking you to do is demonstrate that you have asset management practices in place, because we're going to loan you billions of dollars to build a bridge, a new wastewater treatment plant, sewers. One of the challenges I have is there's been no standard to demonstrate that you have asset management, and now a standard's coming out. Now, PAS 55 has been around, but in the United States, it hasn't gotten a lot of foothold. This one will. I'm hearing it all over the place. I think EPA, I think the federal funding agencies are going to start recognizing this as how a municipal organization or a public utility can demonstrate that they have good asset management. They're being good stewards of the assets that the federal government is funding. And therefore, if the federal government is starting to give ISO a foothold, I think it's going to grow into the private industry as well. So.
Hey, Terry, one last thing. If you're really interested in seeing an interesting video, you can go to YouTube and look up MDOT's asset management program. It's the state of Michigan's. MDOT. And it actually gives you a really good overview of what asset management is to bridges, roads. They explain the life cycle. I mean, it's technically correct material, but it's very interesting. And so if you just like to pick up some ideas, it's just a YouTube video.
I find it a little ironic that we're in sequestration. We're about to enter our second round of sequestration, and we're talking about federal government stewardship of assets that we own.
It was a state government.
Yeah, I have 2.5 questions. So the first question is, do you have as many examples in the private industry of early adoption of asset management and success in asset management as you have quoted in public sector services? I think, Scott, your company is an exception, or your industry might be an exception. And if no, then the answer is why. And the other question is the connection between asset management and operational excellence. I keep having this question for the last 6 to 8 months since I got introduced in this subject. So, thanks.
Can I take your first question? I think when we look at the history of PAS 55 adoption, certainly in the UK, its first uptake was the regulated industries. But actually, I think you will find that those regulated industries were trying to persuade their regulators that they didn't need quite so much prescriptive regulation. And then following that initial demonstration, the regulators started to encourage the other members of that industry to adopt the same approach. Certainly in the UK and Europe, just moving on from that, we've seen an awful lot of private industry adopting it. So people talk about the power sector, but in the UK and Europe, the power generation sector is not regulated. It's regulated under a market, so all the power generation plants are privately owned. They chose to do it because they saw business benefit in it, and they're not regulated. So I mean, that's a massive industry. In the UK Mirror Committee, we have manufacturers. I've seen manufacturers across Northwest Europe and Northern Europe who are adopting it. Everything from airports, who are privately run in most of Europe, chocolate factories, breweries, distilleries. I'm going into my areas of most interest, roads. But it's certainly our degree of privatization in UK and Europe is possibly different. Here we have privatized a lot of what people would call infrastructure, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not private. So we see that.
Just the water companies, you heard about water earlier, most of them are private in the UK.
So yeah, and we've seen a lot more practice coming from Europe because they accepted PAS 55 earlier than we did, and they started practicing it. So Scottish Water, Scottish Power, they're both private companies, have fantastic programs. John brought together a dozen companies in South Africa. Sasol was there, so it was not limited to UK, and they're really embracing asset management.
They've actually made it mandatory now. It's a required procedure, that stuff. Your second question, funnily enough, is perfectly timed for Sasol, actually. Operational excellence versus asset management. Hey, we don't mind what the title is. Whatever works. It's what's under the skin that matters. And I come from an oil and gas background originally, and asset management had its high profile, the story of how we do stuff in the early 1990s, late 80s, early 90s, particularly upstream in the North Sea. If you go back and say, look, we got this fancy new standard for asset management called ISO55000, they say, oh yeah, here we go again. So you don't call it that. I know it's a standard for asset management, but actually you focus on the content, and they'll put it under a flag called operations excellence or whatever. And in fact, that's exactly what's happened in Sasol. They used operations excellence as the excuse for good asset management. All right?
In Scottish Power, process safety was an excuse for good asset management.
In fact, operational excellence is a symptom of good asset management. All right? There you go.
Well, and operational excellence could benefit from a tightening of the definition because every petroleum company has a different definition of operational excellence. It would be nice to see that community kind of coalesce around a definition maybe very aligned with asset management.
You've prompted me just to add a thought because it gets very detailed. The Global Forum is a very interesting body because it brings together cultures but also terminology and semantics on some of these things. There's been a huge debate about what is maintenance, and Terry, I think, needs 2 beers in him before he makes sense on this topic with maintenance and reliability. I can say that, I got the microphone in the moment, Terry. But no, seriously, I think it means different things to different people sometimes. Now, operational excellence was debated only 2 weeks ago in Calgary again at a meeting, and in the end, the view around the table was there's so many definitions of operational excellence that actually you can't clearly give an answer. But most people felt it was almost as big as asset management and was the indicator of good asset management. Now, there's 3 or 4 people amongst those countries planning to do some work to actually make a white paper to get that understood.
And if you look at operational excellence is within the context of your operations right now. Asset management is a long-term view against the organizational context.
We think what they have in common, of course we have a definition, but while everybody else works it out, we'll see, we'll pay attention to what they do. But we say that operational excellence is understanding the flow of value and everybody in the organization understanding when that value is interrupted and how to fix that value. And so that's, for us, it's very aligned with asset management.
Can I pick up on this too? It's actually one of the takeaways that I got from this conference and so far, and one of the reasons why we came down here. It really came from Scott's presentation. There is both asset management's very big picture, and operational excellence is as large. And I think Scott's clarification was good. Asset management gives you that long-term view. Operational excellence is how you're doing your processes and your management decisions today. For us, I think it comes also around maintenance and reliability. So maintenance excellence is where people are at today, and it's something that they can rally around for our organization. And it's one of the reasons why we're here. And introducing reliability into that next, so reliability excellence gives people an opportunity to think and make better decisions using facts and analysis. Then you can build in this view of good operational excellence that is process-oriented, that is TQM and the other elements that would incorporate that. And then you got the long-term system, management system for making the decisions. So that's I was sketching that out as Scott was talking in his presentation. It's one of the takeaways we'll be bringing back.
I think there's a couple other North American organizations that are making progress in asset management, but I think everybody in the room would agree it's going to be very interesting to watch Michael and his organization's progress over the next few years. It's going to be very interesting to watch Scott and his progress over the next few years. And of course, everybody here hopes it goes really well. You guys are blazing a trail for us, and I think it's fantastic. And we can learn a lot from what's been done in the rest of the world. Rhys is kind of an international ambassador, traveling to all countries and bringing best practices together. So we'll hope to keep him involved in the U.S. community as well.
Just bring the medical kits, right?
Bring the medical kit, exactly right. And again, this is why Michael's starting that activity here to find out what is the U.S. asset management community and who wants to come forward, and the Canadian asset management community, who wants to come forward and do something to make it coalesce so that we can bring whatever we're identifying as best practices back to the international community, share that, and again, see if we can provide a voice that I think we can. I think we can contribute from USA in asset management, especially with guys like you guys. So I don't know what time it is because I'm suspecting some people are leaving to sit. 5 minutes. All right. Well, Ramesh, you want to take that 5 minutes now?
Yes. I just want to take a little bit. You asked example of asset management who has done it. We did it since 2003. That time there was no asset management, but Arner Air Force Base, Aerospace Testing Alliance. 2003, we selected 9001 and tailored it to asset management. We implemented. DNV is our auditor. They come and, in fact, this week they are auditing us on some. We have a 14 process. That's what we are auditing. So we have done. Again, it really is the value we get. Now it's a part of our culture. At the floor level, the guys having a right procedure, PM procedure, updated one, not the old one. All those kind of things has really make the difference. It's a disciplined approach of doing something. That's it. Simple.
I'm Paul Monis from BP. I just had a comment about this change management thing that was raised earlier. I would resonate with that and think that's a huge issue, and particularly since the culture we live in is so reactive. To do this really right, you have to change to be proactive. Don't let it fail, be valuing reliability like you would safety. And there's so many stakeholders and so many silos who don't get that. Right now, it feels like a lot of noise, when you go do these things. And so even people who know there's a big prize, and if you document giant upside in a company or in society for doing it, we still have to overcome our own personal life behavior of firefighting and start to be disciplined and have a discipline to follow this way of being and working. I wonder what your comments are about that, because the societal acceptance point really resonates with that. Is if we don't get everybody, we stay stuck, because all you need is a few people to defeat us. The example was John Sturman at MIT. He's a professor of system dynamics, studied what we were doing in one of our refineries, wrote a bunch of papers about that, and then later tried to get the MIT faculty to maintain their buildings better. And they were having things like the IT wouldn't work, the heating and ventilation wouldn't work. These expensive tuition that the students were paying were suffering from buildings that were bad. and they'd accumulated a backlog of problems in their buildings. So knowing the answer and preaching it to the faculty, even at a great place like MIT, still faces this question of how do I change myself, much less how do I change everybody else. You know, that's what I would leave you with.
Well, I think leadership, which is addressed in the anatomy, starts always with yourself. That's my belief.
I think one of the things that, and I guess there'll be others who've been going to these kind of conferences for longer than I, but if you kind of look back 10 or 15 years at similar type of conferences on this subject area, they've changed. And they've changed quite a lot. And certainly when I started going to these kind of conferences, there was an awful lot of people talking about models for optimization, lifecycle costing models, databases for collecting data. All of these things are going to be the answer. Yep, tools, techniques. Then round about when PAS 55 came out, we saw a big outbreak of people speaking at these conferences about processes being the answer and the management systems the answer. And we've kind of migrated on from that again now. And certainly in the last probably 2, 3, maybe 4 years at most, a lot of these conferences now are speaking about leadership and culture. And it is very interesting, having come from an engineering background and spent a lot of my career dropping in and out of these kind of conferences, how the subject matter of those conferences have changed. And I would personally say that the number one topic of conversation at asset management, engineering, infrastructure, physical asset management conferences at the moment is leadership and culture, and that is exactly the issue. It's getting that change in place. And there's some really good work kicking around on that subject as well.
You'll meet a bunch of the Uptime Award winners here, both this year's and previous years. We've done over 400 first-line assessments on organizations since 2006, and clearly there's lots of things that differentiate people, but the biggest differentiator in these winning companies is absolutely leadership.
So let me go back to this just for a second. When you think about organizations, we have to step back for a second because not everybody's reactive. There's a lot of organizations that aren't reactive today. I mean, how many of you flew down here in a reactive airplane? You didn't. You expect it to be reactive or proactive. You expect that plane to work. And yeah, there's little nuances, but you don't expect an engine to go out while you're up in the air. It happens very rarely. Why? Because it's regulated. What about the nuclear industry? How many of your nukes fail every other week? It happens, but it's very rare. It's going to get in the paper and on the news if it does. But the bottom line is that's a very regulated industry. Have you ever seen their PM programs? Some of you have.
Oh, they're great.
Very detailed. And you know what? If you don't do it, you get shut down. You know, we did the Disney tour not too long ago. That was pretty interesting too. You know, if they have a overdue PM on one of their roller coaster cars, it can't get on the track. It's electronically locked. There are people that do great things today, but most of them are regulated. It's because they have to do it. Too many of our organizations today, get off my soapbox, are very complacent. We don't do it unless we have to do it. And what do we pay for it?
Some of those proactive people are in this room.
I mean, the imperative may be regulatory, it may be risk, large risk, it may be commercial, but there has to be an imperative to moving towards that. And those with maybe too much money or, you know, whatever reason that they don't need to. But I think when you see success stories and you see firms and others in your industry sort of separating themselves, and what you're seeing, and that's what I see in our industry, in the rail industry, the firms that are applying this system are separating themselves from the pack. And they're doing it from a commercial perspective, but they're also doing it, interesting, from a quality of life perspective. John Murphy said this morning, it's better life working in a predictive environment than it is in a reactive environment. It's better for everyone. It's better for the front line. It's better for the seniors. And so when you see better commercial performance and you see a higher quality of life, people are going to want to emulate the leaders. And I think that'll help also from that perspective.
John, before we wrap it up, let me just have a show of hands before we lose everybody. How many people here are currently pursuing asset management, PAS 55, ISO 55000? Just a show of hands. All right, terrific. John, go ahead.
I just wanted to throw in a bit of good news about the opportunity for the communication between human beings and a warning sign that you need to look out for, because I think the human factors have come out very strongly in this last discussion. And one thing you can start on pretty much straight away, which is learning the language and how to communicate in a non-technical way to the rest of the world. But the tipping point in many of organizations' realization of both the opportunity and the implications is the point where it becomes golf course chatter as opposed to a push from within. It's the same tipping point as Six Sigma got. You know, it was the VP talking to another VP over in the golf club. Have you done this stuff? Whatever it is, it sounds good, I'd better do something as well. That, if it can be timed at the same point as you guys preparing the ground, as Scott said earlier on, that will actually make a very, very important catalyst effect. The warning point I wanted to make with regard to the skepticism and the sheer repetitive disillusionment of previous attempts to get better that turn into short-term temporary successes, right? There are two particular subspecies in every organization you've got to actively identify. You've got the dinosaurs and you've got the terrorists, all right? Now, the dinosaurs are really going to struggle with some of this stuff, okay? Don't try and sell the whole story in one go. Piecemeal. Develop is an evolution of realization, rather than paint the big picture with lots of complicated interdependencies and everything. It affects everything. It's a great big gearbox. All the teeth mesh together. But that's scary for most people, all right? The terrorist stroke saboteur is the one who will be actively threatened by what you're proposing. It's losing their power base. It's putting them in a position of visible incompetence, all right? The Peter principle. It'll become more transparent that they don't know what they're doing. They will work aggressively, quite often below the radar, to undermine the change. They have to be anticipated, and a motivation has to be substituted for them. It's no good hoping that they'll go away. They won't. You have to actually look for opportunities to substitute alternative motivations to support rather than fight. If you can convert them, they are your champions. All right? Those two groups in any organization are probably the most critical to organizational acceptance.
Steve Thomas has a couple books on change management out at the bookstore. He's in our maintenance reliability committee, so he's taken some of those tools that you referred to and kind of applied them to maintenance reliability. They're worth a look. David, go ahead.
Apologies for keeping you. I know it's the end of the day. Could I respond on a slightly different basis to my colleagues here? I actually support everything they've said. Bring it down to the human character. When I joined the railways in the late 70s, 80s in the UK, there was a culture of firefighting, and people were adrenaline junkies, and there was excitement, and there was reward for solving the problem. Until gradually some senior managers said, but you caused the problem by your lack of planning, so you're not going to be rewarded for solving it. On the technical level, for example, there was a lot of overtime payment to technicians who were called out to fix failures out of hours. When the jobs were combined so that they didn't get any payment for fixing the faults because they were responsible for the maintenance, suddenly those numbers of failures out of hours disappeared. And actually there was evidence that some of them might not have been entirely random or accidental. So, he said choosing his words carefully. So the point is, can we find a way to reward people and for people to feel good about the job they do if it's calm, planned, delivering results? And I think, without extending this into an hour's lecture on psychology, I do think there's a lot that can be done in that direction.
So I'm sorry, Marie, we're out of time. But let me just say this, is that we're thrilled for the day today. We think it was fantastic learning. We very appreciate everybody who came over from the other side of the pond, especially to bring their learning to us. We're especially thrilled to support Michael Savato and his desire to advance the asset management community here in the U.S. So I would say maybe David, for quickly if you can, and Michael if you can, will you make the invitation for the 4:15 meeting in your own words?
Sure. So we've been talking about myself, and I guess it's this idea around building that golf course chatter. As we moved forward with the asset management program at the MTA, we believe that our success was really depending on being part of a tide that was rising, and that even if we were to outperform, we would actually fall back if it wasn't also something that our CEO or the vice presidents were hearing as from their peers. And so we've been working for the last couple of years to build support for a community of practice around asset management, again at that sort of senior level. And over the last year or so, or 6 months or so, we've been working with Terry and David and others in this room, Scott, to form a community of practice, some sort of organization around asset management. And at 4:30 today, we're going to have a little bit of a 45-minute an hour discussion about what that means and what the vision is and how we see it rolling out here in the United States.
4:15.
4:15, sorry, yeah.
And you have time if you want to run down to the expo, grab a beer, if that's all right.
Yeah,
Can they grab a beer? It might make the meeting a little more.
Make the conversation go a lot smoother, I
Yeah,
suspect.
exactly. You're free to go do that and come back here in any country, right? It's not country specific. Anybody can come.
No, that's right.
Yep. David, anything you want to add to that? No? All right. This is just so we can be clear, this has been driven by Michael. We're glad to be in support of it. Anything we can do to advance the asset management practice. We view ourselves as having a role in guiding maintenance reliability professionals to asset management. Michael works at a different level. He has maintenance reliability professionals as part of his asset management program. He's got lots of other things as part of his asset management program as well that aren't maintenance reliability. So he's talking about the bigger context of asset management, so don't feel left behind. There's a role for maintenance reliability in asset management, and that's what we're doing also, is helping maintenance reliability professionals asset management. But please, if you have an interest, come to this.
Actually, there's one more point, and I looked over there at Bruce, is that it also comes out of the work that we did with the ISO community, and the U.S. tag. There was a community of people that came around the formation of ISO55000 in the U.S. They created bonds that are permanent, and we want to try to find various forms to make those bonds sustainable over time, as well as promote the adoption of ISO55000 in the U.S. So we have multiple motivations for doing this.
That is a great point. Who in here is a member of the U.S. tag of ISO C521? Stand up if you are, please. And I think we should recognize everybody. Terry, stand up, please. Michael, stand up. And let's recognize the contributors from the United States. Scott, absolutely. And then who from their own country, outside of the United States? Stand up if you were involved in the mirror groups at your own. Henry's standing basically with his arm there. How about another hand for everybody internationally who created this standard? All right, so that concludes the formal part of today. You can either just take a short bio break or go down and grab something to drink, come back if you're interested. Michael's going to lead a discussion starting at 4:15. I think we're going to try to limit it to around a half hour or less, and then there's still time to get back in, get a second drink, or get ready to go out to the Polynesian luau. Thank you, everybody.